and welcome to Power Play on this Thursday. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa this evening. Tonight, a tax cut, but no budget.
Mr. Carney said during the election campaign that he had a plan. And he took great delight in saying that a slogan is not a plan. Well, a budget is a plan.
The opposition slams the Liberals for their decision not to release a budget. We're going to talk to Government House Leader Steve McKinnon about what Canadians can expect will happen when the House resumes. Then, a warning on China from someone who knows its dark side too well.
The scope for cooperation between Canada and China is extremely narrow now.
Michael Kovrig was detained in China for more than 1,000 days. Now China is pitching closer ties with Canada, despite what happened to Kovrig and a litany of other serious irritants in our country's relationship. Kovrig will join us in studio to talk about that coming up. Plus, housing price climb down.
Is this a signal from you that you don't think housing prices should go down?
You would be very hard-pressed to make that conclusion.
Delivering that. No, I think that we need to deliver more supply.
On day one of Cabinet, the new housing minister contradicts the Prime Minister on housing prices, then climbs down later on social media. What does it say about Cabinet and about housing? Our front bench will weigh in. Brian Gallant, Tony Clement, and Nathan Cullen are here a little bit later on in the show. First, though,
I'm proposing offering the Prime Minister to sit down with him and propose conservative solutions that we hope that he will steal. I want him to steal our best ideas. That includes cutting the bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid, and other wasteful spending to bring down deficits, inflation, and taxes. But I'm happy to bring them right to the Prime Minister's desk and invite him to steal them and put them right in his platform. And if he does, then we will help get those passed before Canada Day. So let's work together.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre there offering, he says, to work with the Prime Minister after Mark Carney announced his government would prioritize passing an income tax cut by July 1st, just 6 weeks from now. But Poilievre is calling out the government's decision not to deliver a spring budget. The Tory take, no budget, no plan. Why are the feds foregoing a federal budget for now? And what work can they actually get done with the opposition in the short weeks they'll have once the House of Commons resumes? Government House Leader Steve McKinnon is live here in studio with us now. Hi, Minister. It's good to see you. Welcome back.
It's good to be back.
Thank you very much for making the time. I do want to start off before I get into the budget on sort of the pitch there from Mr. Poilievre, which was, you know, there are certain things that both parties are proposing in different forms, but ultimately he says that the Conservatives will work with your party to advance some of that prior to Canada Day. Are any conversations going on between yourself and I guess the actual leader in the House of the Conservatives, Andrew Scheer?
Well, we had a conversation this morning, as I did with my Bloc Québécois counterpart, Madame Normandin. And Mr. Scheer and I are old friends, and you laugh, but...
no, I know. You've both been in this role for a while.
It's actually true, and Mr. Scheer and I have a great working relationship. We don't always agree. We certainly don't always agree to move forward on specific things, but we always have constructive conversations, and to the extent that Mr. Poilievre, Mr. Scheer want to work with us on our priorities, we accept. I said yesterday, we will extend the hand of cooperation to the Conservatives, to the Bloc, to other MPs in the House of Commons. And we know we have a minority, so we know that on any given initiative, bill, estimates, you name it, we will need to attract the support of some other members of the House of Commons. And so we'll be working to do that. But while we have a minority, we also have a mandate. And Canadians expect action. Canadians expect results from this Parliament. We're going to have a short burst of Parliament here between now and the end of June, where we will lay out, I think, a very aggressive agenda, one that won't surprise anyone. It'll be very much a reflection of those issues and themes that were discussed in the election campaign and that we believe we've secured a mandate to accomplish. And we will work with other parties to get those things done.
So let me drill down into one specific thing we know is coming when the House resumes, and that's what the Prime Minister spoke about yesterday, this Ways and Means motion to introduce a tax cut. The Conservatives I've interviewed, whom I put the question to, is that something that you're going to support, given you also proposed a tax cut during the campaign? mentioned if it is what your government says it is, like if it is the tax cut and not a whole bunch of other stuff designed to wedge them, then yes, in principle they would, but they're waiting to see if that's the case. Will that be the case? Is this going to be a straight up and down tax cut, or are you going to include other stuff in there?
Well, I'm reluctant to go into any kind of specifics, but suffice to say we've agreed to a date to talk to the other House leaders. We will obviously keep dialoguing with other parties with respect to our plans and what we hope to accomplish. And this will be very transparent about what we hope to accomplish in this spring sitting. The tax cut is certainly prominent among them. In
principle, can I ask you though, like, look, you were in the last parliament. There were on multiple occasions, legislation that was introduced or was separated from other things that was designed to be able to say, hey, this party doesn't want you to have a tax cut. And the Conservatives played their own games too. I'm not trying to take away from that. I think the message that Canadians sent during this campaign was like, not now. Let's actually do the things that both parties are saying that they want to do to help Canadians' lives and improve their lives. Is that a message your party has taken to heart? And in principle, will that be reflected in what comes through the House? I think that's a very valid insight, Vashi, with respect to what Canadians are telling us. They're telling us they want results out of this parliament. They don't want games. In principle, your question was in principle. In principle, we absolutely want to move forward on initiatives that are what they say are what we say they are very focused and targeted at getting the results that we committed to Canadians. I spoke to the Prime Minister the other day about the minority situation. I asked him if he was having any conversations with anyone about crossing the floor, since you are so close to that magic majority number. He said no. Are you, as House Leader? I haven't had no such discussion. So there's no intention on the government's part to try and bring people over more permanently? I've had no such discussions. And do you intend to? No. No? Okay. Let me move on to the budget, because I do want to ask about the absence of one. Today, Ontario delivered their budget. I believe it's the 10th province this year to be able to do that. Why can a province deliver a budget and not the federal government? Well, Mr. Ford has been the Premier now. This is his third term. Just re-elected a few months ago. And just re-elected a few months ago with the same finance minister. I salute Mr. Bethlen Falvey, who I've known for some time, and congratulate him for his work. But Mr. Carney was elected leader of the Liberal Party not too long ago, sworn in as Prime Minister right into an election campaign. He's been fundamentally the Prime Minister for 2 weeks. And he will, make no mistake about it, be very, very focused on the economy, on jobs, obviously on trade, and on the fiscal situation of the Government of Canada. And I think it's entirely reasonable that Mr. Carney and Mr. Champagne take the time that is required to formulate what will ultimately end up in a fall economic statement, I believe, which will be a significant update with respect to the Government of Canada and its budgetary intentions. In the meantime, we're going to have a very coherent and focused throne speech. We're going to debate that throne speech in the Parliament of Canada in full view of the public. We're going to vote on all of the supply items that the government requires in terms of moving forward. That will also be done, of course, very, very transparently. We'll talk about the tax cut that you and I just discussed. So I think that Canadians will, over the course of this short session of Parliament between now and the end of June, be very, very clear. There will be no ambiguity with respect to the priorities of the Government of Canada. Sure, the priorities, but I think they are as concerned with the priorities as they are about your government's ability to deliver on them. And it's why I ask, for example, about the budget. Don't take my word. Derek Holt, Vice President and Head of Capital Markets Economics for Scotiabank, says, while individual actions and bills can still be presented along the way and before summer recess, as you're saying they will, I still don't like this one bit. Canadians have a right to know the state of the government's finances, like how bad are they now, and the planned consequences to deficits and debt. Otherwise, it feels like Canadians basically wrote a blank check on April 28th when they granted a minority government to the Liberal Party. Do you concede that Canadians did not write a blank check, and don't they deserve to know what's in the math? Well, of course they deserve to know, and of course the Finance Department will continue producing statistics as it always does, and of course all of these things will be hotly analyzed and debated by Mr. Holt and others, and obviously by parliamentarians. What I can tell you is that they didn't really do that in the last government. Your fall economic statement, the supplementary estimates, all of it was much delayed, right? And we still don't have a budget for 18. We just emerged from an election campaign. We have a brand new Prime Minister. We have a lot of new ministers.
We have a new set of priorities. We're going to have new marching orders. My colleagues in caucus and in cabinet will have new marching orders. I think it's entirely reasonable, and Canadians understand that we want a short burst of results. There are some obvious things that we need to get to in this very short period in the spring, and we'll come back in the fall. I think you'll see with an agenda that is very much the reflection of this cabinet, of this new prime minister, and a prime minister who, it must be said, and as was reflected in your own interview with him, is supremely preoccupied with the economy, with economic matters, with trade with the United States and with the world, with building in this country. And I think you will see that what he's talked about is very much what Canadians are going to get.
But we have now the outlines of a plan, to be fair. And your promises during the campaign were specific. Again, I'll go back to my point, which is that I think Canadians are anxious about your government's or any government's ability to deliver on it at a time of crisis. We look at the Ontario budget, just as an example today. They're projecting far fewer jobs, 50% fewer jobs created over the next 3 years because of the trade uncertainty that we are experiencing. Their deficit has grown. Their projection has grown by $10 billion. Like, those are tangible things that have changed because of the trade war we're in. And Canadians now, for the next 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, will have no idea what that means for the federal picture and your ability to do what you promised to do. Like, you talked about a plan during the campaign. Don't Canadians deserve to see the plan?
Canadians are rightly anxious about this. I don't think we've ever made any bones about the fact that the trade situation, which continues to evolve, perhaps not on a daily, but certainly on a regular basis, with respect to moves made south of the border. That's a very much an evolving situation, indeed, very much a concerning situation. One job loss is too many, and this government is very much at work on one side, mitigating, securing that trade situation with the United States. On the other side, however, building a 21st century economy by building, literally, but also by thinking about the kinds of fundamentals that this economy is going to require to give opportunity to young people, to provide housing to young Canadian families, to lower their taxes and get more affordability. These are the themes that we've been talking about, and these are you will see unfold this spring, through the summer, and into the fall.
But themes aren't actions, right? Themes aren't a plan. And even in your campaign, you didn't even, the costing of your platform did not include any assessment of the damage of the trade war onto our economy. So again, like, the feasibility of what you're proposing, I'm not trying to take away from the fact that it's ambitious and that Canadians voted for it, right? They did, and they want to see your plan actually happen. But how do we know?
A very fluid, evolving situation involving a very...
it's going to be fluid in September, too.
Well, we don't know that. We'll obviously hope to try and mitigate that. But I think it's that Canadians understand that a government that has been sworn in after 2 weeks, which is pretty much record time, is going to take the time to, digest all of these actions, the data, prepare a very, very comprehensive response. And Mr. Carney has made given us some very unambiguous direction that the Canadian economy, building things in this country, mitigating any impacts of the trade uncertainty with the United States, and focusing on jobs for Canadians and affordability. Those are the things we're going to be focused on, and you'll see those unfold on a daily basis between now and the end of June, and indeed into the summer and fall.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Minister, a pleasure to have you back. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Ashley.
Government House Leader, Minister Steve McKinnon. We're going to unpack what you heard from Minister McKinnon with our front bench a little bit later on. Brian Gallant, Tony Clement, and Nathan Cullen will be here. First, though, some election-related news. The Bloc Québécois is heading to court seeking a new election in the riding of Terrebonne, which the Liberals won after a judicial recount by just a single vote.
But since, I don't know what's the name in English of Élections Canada, but since they cannot by themselves ask for the election to be repeated, we have to bring this situation in front of a judge in a court in order to do the election all over again.
The Bloc is arguing a new election should take place after Elections Canada confirmed 5 ballots were not counted because they arrived late. Those ballots came in return envelopes with an error in the postal code, though at this point it isn't clear whether it was that error or an error at the point of sending that led to the delay. The Bloc says it intends to take the case right to the Quebec Superior Court, insisting they want action as soon as possible. We're going to take a quick commercial break here on Power Play. Up next, Canada's ambassador to China told CTV News in an exclusive China's ambassador to Canada told CTV News in an exclusive interview he wants a bigger and better relationship with Canada. But Michael Kovrig, a Canadian detained for over 1,000 days by China, says a reset is not feasible or advisable. Find out why after a short commercial break. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Power Play. Chinese ambassador to Canada, Wang Di, spoke exclusively to CTV News recently. The ambassador insisted in our interview that China wants to forge more economic ties with Canada in light of punishing U.S. tariffs and in spite of major tensions between our two countries. Those tensions reached a fever pitch beginning in 2018 when China arbitrarily detained 2 Canadians, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. They were both released after being held for more than 1,000 days. Michael Kovrig is with us now to respond to the ambassador's comments. He's now a senior advisor at the Crisis Group. Hi, Mr. Kovrig. Good to see you.
Thank you.
I'm
Pleasure to be here.
glad to have you here in studio. Thank you very much for making the time. I really wanted to talk to you following our interview with the ambassador from China to Canada, where he had a very specific message that he kept delivering over and over again, which was essentially, if I could synthesize it, time for Canada and China to put aside their, and he characterized them as normal differences, and foster practical cooperation moving forward. Why do you think, after years of us requesting an interview, he at this point is willing and wanting to deliver that message?
Short answer, because China's in a bad position right now. They're struggling with their domestic economy, and they're under extreme pressure from the U.S. administration's very high tariffs. Even though those tariffs have come down, they're still much higher than they were before, and that's putting huge pressure on China. That's also in the context of a much broader strategic rivalry and growing Cold War between China and the U.S. So he's looking to wedge Canada away from the United States. And this is a campaign that the Chinese are waging all around the world. So it's not just Canada. I've seen his counterparts in Europe trying to deliver the same message.
And what kind of reception are they getting at this point? And I'll later ask you sort of what should they be getting, I guess.
I think you're talking about in Canada, for example?
In Canada or
anywhere.
Even elsewhere. What are your observations? Like, are people aware of the risks that what they're proposing entail?
I think not enough people are sufficiently aware. I think one of the challenges we have, both in Canada, and I see this in Europe and many other countries, is there's still a huge gap between what specialists and experts, intelligence analysts inside the government, but also other researchers and scholars understand about China and about the Chinese Communist Party, how it thinks, its ideology, its worldview, and its agenda, and what the public knows and understands about it. And one of the things that I keep trying to do is close that gap, because we need a wider Canadian public and European public and Australian public to understand the challenge we're dealing with, because we are running out of time. We are in a vastly changed geopolitical situation. China is not a friendly country. The ambassador, the problem with the ambassador's talking points, he needs to update them a bit, I think. His words are friendly, his smile is friendly, but the actions of his government are ultimately harmful to Canada's interests and values, and it's the same story in Europe. They are, I think, finding purchase in some individuals, some business interests who keep hoping for business opportunities in China. That's primarily economically driven. It's money. But the reality is the scope for cooperation between Canada and China is extremely narrow now. There are things that can be done, but it's limited.
So let me pick up on that, because I think, for example, when you were detained, the Canadian public had the most heightened, in my lifetime, awareness of the threat that China posed, and were very wary of embarking on a greater economic relationship. But time has passed since then, and we're up against, Trump all the time talking about sovereignty and economic damage with tariffs. And I wondered if you had one message for Canadians about the true threat China poses, what would it be?
That the Chinese Communist Party is an extremely powerful bureaucratic authoritarian organization, and it has a single-minded focus on a geostrategic agenda. And that agenda is China first. Make China the most dominant power in the international system so that it assures the security of the party and those Chinese elites. It dominates that system. It reshapes that system in its own image. This is not the 1960s where Mao Zedong is trying to spread communism or something, but it's rather making a world safer for an authoritarian governance system like China. A liberal international order is not a comfortable place. They want to rewrite the international order. The Chinese Communist Party wants to dominate East Asia and carve out a sphere of influence in the region where every country in the region defers and first looks to Beijing before they make a policy move to make sure that China will be okay with it. And they want to ultimately erode that system of rules and norms that Canada has benefited from for so many years. So China ultimately is hostile to an order that is good for Canada. It wants to undermine it, and it's been working to undermine it and take advantage of it for the last 25 years since it joined the WTO. And why we are where we are now, why we have all these problems with the United States, why the world is in such a disorder, is ultimately because the system that the United States and other Western powers built after World War II is fracturing. And the key source of that challenge is the rise of China and strategic rivalry, and China's undermining and free riding and exploitation of that system. It starts in Beijing.
What is the implication, or what are the implications of that for Canadian politicians as they do two things now with a new government? Embark on, trying to transform the economy here, but secondly, they're going to develop a new foreign policy. That is a campaign pledge of the Liberal Party during the election.
Right. From a foreign policy perspective, I think that job one for Prime Minister Carney and his new cabinet is to prepare this country for a much harsher geopolitical environment. China is the primary driver of that shift, and so we need a China strategy, a whole of government strategy where every cabinet minister is on the same page and the Chinese are not able to try to find cracks and exploit them in various ways. And to prepare this country for that challenge, it means upgrading and continuing previous work to improve competence and understanding of China, both within the government and in the expert community and in the public, and taking all kinds of measures, particularly economic but also national security measures, to strengthen Canada and prepare Canada for a much harsher world and protect the Canadian economy and Canadian citizens from harmful Chinese actions.
And on the economic front, because I think, as you mentioned, like where the argument the ambassador makes has any traction is largely within the business community, businesses who see at a time when our most reliable partner has become the opposite, the potential to go to other markets that could supplant in size the United States. There are very few. There's basically China or India. What is your message on the economic front about whether or not necessarily if it's feasible, whether it's advisable?
I think some limited economic engagement with China is understandable, right? First of all, it's kind of like a Hippocratic oath for the Canadian economy. First, do no harm. We're not looking to engage in self-harming behavior. It's rather finding that intersection, recognizing that values are integral to Canadian society, to our strength as a society, that values are a Canadian interest. But values aren't just about criticizing China on human rights or things we say. It's about the choices we make in terms of particularly economic engagement. What kind of business do we do with China? So selling some kinds of commodities, not necessarily a problem. But what you want to be careful with is too much dependence on any one actor. We are seeing that with the United States now as well, right? We need to diversify our trade and investment away from China, to some extent away from the United States, toward other partners. Not to completely eliminate it, but put Canada in a position where China doesn't have the leverage to use something like the canola trade to hurt Canada and constrain our policy choices. We don't want them to be able to coerce Canada into doing things that otherwise Canadians wouldn't want to do. So business needs to be very careful. The reality is there's a common story, for example, with investment in China. A foreign company goes in, invests, develops a market, its IP is acquired, stolen, or extracted, and soon Chinese competitors rise up, replace it, it loses its market and has to exit. It's not a good story. It's not beneficial to business. But some trade is, of course, possible. It's a question of how that trade influences the Canadian economy. A key problem is that what China wants to dominate global supply chains, to control things like critical minerals and high technology. It wants to master the commanding heights of the 21st century economies, AI, batteries, solar panels, electric cars, all of those things. If China is on track to have over 40% of global manufacturing capacity, if we then end up, or the United States and our allies end up in a conflict with China, and it has that much manufacturing capacity, it dominates supply chains, and Canada has gradually been deindustrialized, and we're just, once again, hewers of wood and drawers of water, how's that conflict going to go? Not well.
I just have a few seconds left, but as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, as someone who's very familiar with sort of the political decision makers in this country, and there are some new, but there are some that remain. Like, do you believe that the people who are making the kinds of decisions you speak to are fully aware of the risk you lay out?
Yeah, I talk regularly with experts on these issues inside the Canadian government. So I can tell you that the people in our foreign ministry, intelligence agencies, defense, and so on, Industry Canada, which is also a very important piece of this, I said, they understand. I think there will be always, with a new government, there will be maybe a temptation for ministers to think that I can be the one to crack the China problem and reset relations. I think that's going to get a cold shower. It's not feasible. What is feasible is to work within that space, build stable, respectful diplomatic relations with senior Chinese officials from the Prime Minister on down, so that when there are problems and disagreements, and there are likely to be many, we can at least manage them diplomatically and constrain the likelihood that China will take even more harmful measures. It's about protecting ourselves, increasing defense spending, rebuilding the Canadian defense industrial base, and augmenting our economic security. And that's what I'm here in Ottawa this week to talk about at the B7 Summit, bolstering Canada's economic security, because the economy is a key pillar of our national security.
I will leave it on that note. Mr. Kovrig, a pleasure as always. Thanks for your insights.
Thank you.
That's Michael Kovrig. We've got more Power Play coming up. Our front bench will be here. The opposition is not happy with the Liberals' plan to skip a spring budget. We're going to talk about that with Brian Gallant, Tony Clement, and Nathan Cullen. There they are in just 2 minutes. Stay right there.
First, you need to provide the tax break to Canadians, then the throne speech, then you have a substantive fall economic statement, so you have a clearer picture of the finance. But what I'm saying is that there will be no surprises in that, because we have already outlined in pretty much details during the campaign exactly how we're going to do it.
Mr. Carney said during the election campaign that he had a plan, and he took great delight in saying that a slogan is not a plan. Well, a budget is a plan. And if he does indeed have a plan, if he does know what he's doing, then he would introduce a budget so that Canadians know exactly what the finances are.
No budget, no plan. That's the accusation from the leader of the Conservative opposition following the government's decision not to release a budget. The last official look at the Fed's books came in the middle of December. On that fateful day, the fall economic statement was released, and then Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, of course, quit. Now the Liberals say the next peek at the books will come with a, quote, substantial fall economic statement months from now. Our front bench is here to talk about that. Former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant is here. He's the CEO of Space Canada now. Tony Clement served in senior roles in Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper's cabinet. He's now CEO of Tony Clement International. And former NDP MP and BC Minister Nathan Cullen rounds us out tonight. He's now a senior advisor at Strategy Corp. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Thanks for making the time. Tony, I'll start with you. Is this a big deal that there's not going to be a budget? If so, why? If not, why not?
I think it is a big deal. We won't have a budget this year until the fall now. That's not usual. It's not good for parliamentary procedure because billions of dollars are still being spent every day of the week in Ottawa for various projects and plans. None of that has the scrutiny of Parliament. So that's not good, I would argue. I think it's better parliamentary practice to bring what your current spending plans are, at least to Parliament for review by opposition parties and by Liberal parliamentarians as well. They're in the dark as well. Does this matter? I guess is the second part of your question. And yeah, they're still in a honeymoon, so I don't think it's in any way lethal to them. But it's not a good thing when you have a government that's just been elected that is not presenting a budget.
Their argument, Nathan, against presenting it seems to be kind of twofold. The first is more, we're new, we just got in, we don't have enough time because the House is going to rise at the end of June. Mm-hmm. The other is it's also very uncertain right now, given what's going on with the trade war, which neither the Liberals or the Conservatives booked into their campaign costing, I'll point out, but that we might have more clarity in the fall, and therefore it's like not useful for us to do this now. I should also point out it's not just the Conservatives criticizing this for them. The Bloc today did, as did the NDP. What do you think?
Well, if we're waiting for certainty from President Trump before we release a federal budget, we're going to be waiting another 3.5 years because we don't have a lot of predictability, especially when it comes to things like tariffs and what Mr. Trump is going to think today versus tomorrow. I guess to your first question, Dashi, the timing seems strange to me. Tony's right. Parliament is primarily charged, its first and foremost role for all MPs that are not in the cabinet is scrutinizing the government's spending. And to go this long without that scrutiny, that's a bit worrisome. Second, this is a honeymoon period. Even the Conservatives have talked about supporting things that maybe they agree with, we'll see. But compare this to the Parliament that Canadians saw before the election, where nothing was getting done. There's a willingness on the side of the NDP, which Don Davies has already talked about. Let's sit down. There's people losing their jobs right now. I know the Liberals are focused on a tax cut measure, but you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can bring that in as a budget item. If they've articulated all the things that they want to do during the campaign time, well, if that's their budget in the fall, that can be their budget right now. And that just gives Canadians a clarity on what's happening. And I think would actually be more reassuring from Canadians rather than saying it was December. The next time we'll see the books will be October, November. That's a long time. And more importantly, if I'm worried about my job, what is the government's response to it, aside from this one measure that Mr. Carney has talked about? So I just don't know why they're doing it. I think it is good practice that they should have a budget now, because this is the time to do it. And secondly, they have a willing parliament. This is not like they're going to be taken down and suddenly we're back in an election over a budget. That seems very, very unlikely, to say almost impossibly remote.
Yeah. Feels impossible for sure. Brian, do you think there's any political impetus not to release a budget for them right now? And if so, what do you think it is?
I really don't. I don't disagree with Nathan and Tony's analysis per se. I just have a little bit more sympathy. I think we have to put into context. Typically, in a calendar year, you would see Parliament rise, Parliament be finalized, everybody go home somewheres sort of mid-June. So really, if we're going with a typical kind of calendar, that's what the argument is that by typically you'd have a budget by now, then they'd have 1 month to do it. They've formed government, they just formed their cabinet. So I think we have to have a little bit of sympathy here. And frankly, there are other governments that would have done one quicker after an election, but that was also often the continuity of a government. Now, is that the case here? Debatable, I'm sure, but nevertheless, I think what we find ourselves with, and you did this in your preamble, Vash, in the sense that the sort of turbulent political times that we've been living in Canada all started with the fall economic statement in December, if I'm not mistaken, of last year, where the resignation of Freeland kind of then cascaded into what we saw happen in the first few months of this year with a leadership race. And let's be honest with ourselves, the Liberal Party went pretty quick with the Liberal leadership. The winner, Mark Carney, of that leadership called an election almost right away. So it's not like they were trying to delay. I mean, the circumstances are what they are. And I can tell you from the work that I do at Space Canada, we would check out if there were consultations with finance on the budget, and they didn't seem to be opening up. And then one day it opened up and it seemed like the deadline was pretty darn quick. So I think they didn't really know what to do when you had a prime minister leaving, and clearly whoever would become the next prime minister would want to put their stamp on it. And the last point I'll make, I again, on the side of sympathy, one person once told me when I was in government that there is no mechanism with greater impact on showing what your priorities are as a government than the budget. And if you
That's
take
right.
that to be true, which I think it's pretty good advice, they also want to take their time. They want to consult. They want to have some runway to think things through and then present something. So the last point I'll make on maybe advice, I wouldn't wait until December for the fall economic statement as we saw in 2024. I certainly would try to do it a bit earlier, sort of October-ish this year.
Maybe less fanfare too. The minister will not quit on the same day and lead to the end of the prime minister's time. Maybe Tony, just time for one last question to you before we take a quick break. But there's more than just the budget, right? There's this tax cut. They say they're going to introduce other things into the House. The Conservatives whom I've interviewed have said like they're willing to support, as Nathan mentioned. So is the Bloc. So is the NDP. Do you think that they're, and I asked Minister McKinnon earlier, like, are they going to be straight up about what they introduce? Because parties, governments of all parties, on occasion use that legislation to be able to say, oh, look, this party didn't vote in favor of a middle-class tax cut because there's other stuff in there. He seemed to indicate in principle that wasn't their intention. Do you think that could be the case?
Yeah, I mean, if it's an up or down vote on the tax cut, I would be surprised if Conservatives didn't vote for a tax cut. Having been in government, I can tell you that there's
you guys did it too sometimes.
Well, and there's all these pressures, bureaucratic pressures or political pressures. Oh, we've got a bill coming up. Put this in the bill. Put that in the bill. So that's the discipline that the Liberals are going to have. If they want to have an up or down vote on the tax cut, that's one thing. But the minute you put other things into the bill, that creates a different scenario.
Yeah, I'm so curious to see what they end up doing. We've got a lot more to talk about. We're going to take a quick break. The front bench is back after that break. Stay right there.
When Gregor Robertson was Vancouver mayor, the price of buying a house increased by 179% in one of the most expensive markets in Canada. Why do you think someone with this track record should oversee the housing file? Is this a signal from you that you don't think housing prices should go down?
You would be very hard pressed to make that conclusion from everything I've said and what our priorities are. We have a strong view on housing, a very clear policy, a policy developed with a number of members of the team, including with Mr. Robertson.
That was the Prime Minister's answer to a question this week following his cabinet swearing in about whether picking former Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson to be housing minister is a sign the government doesn't think housing prices should go down. You heard the Prime Minister there. He said no. Well, about 24 hours later, his housing minister said something different.
Do you think home prices need to go down? No, I think that we need to deliver more supply, make sure the market is stable. It's a huge part of our economy. But we need to be delivering more affordable housing. And the government of Canada has not been building affordable housing since the 90s, and we've created a huge shortage across Canada. That's where the big need is right now.
That contradiction made the rounds on social media, and last night it was there. The minister posted a clarification, writing in part, "The question I answered was about reducing the price of a family's current home, which for most Canadians is their most valuable asset. The question wasn't should homes be more affordable. Of course they should." So what does the back and forth tell us about how important housing will be in this government's mandate and how cabinet will operate? Our front bench is back. Brian Gallant, Tony Clement, and Nathan Cullen. Nathan, I'll start with you on this because you're in British Columbia. I think the reason that this ended up being like a little bit of a political football is because of the demographics of the vote, in particular the degree to which older Canadians who do own homes and who value that of understandably as an asset supported the Liberals, in that younger Canadians may have looked elsewhere. Do you think this ends up being a problem for the government?
You want to be real tight on this messaging. Like there can't be a lot of distance, and I'm sure on policy, there's not a lot of distance between Gregor Robertson and Mr. Carney. In the campaign, Mr. Carney's platforms were quite detailed, and I'm sure that's what's going to be guiding what happens next. And look, we're in the middle of a crisis, so this is very important. I could understand why you wouldn't want to tell particularly older Canadians, maybe a demographic that overwhelmingly voted Liberal, that as part of pushing more supply into the market, especially in places like Toronto, expensive places like Vancouver, Victoria, where I am today, that your price of your house might go down just as you're looking to sell and move into something smaller, et cetera. But the fact of the math is, Mike Mowat and others said is that if you put more supply in and you make housing more affordable, it's across the board. It's not lower housing prices for some, but others continue to increase generally. It doesn't make any sense. And I can understand why Gregor said what he said. But I think if their plan is their plan and they want to double the rate of housing, BC and other provinces stand at the ready and let's get at it. And it's going to have an effect on pricing, which is the point. We want it to be more affordable.
It wasn't the only contradiction this week, Brian. You had Minister Robertson saying that, somewhat different than what Prime Minister Carney had said the day before. You also had comments on pipelines that Minister Carney made to me, and then a different set of comments that Minister Guilbeault made. You've, been at the helm of a cabinet. Is that a sign of anything this early on, or is there not much there?
As the sort of head of the government, when I was premier, it's certainly fun to wake up and be told that a minister said something that was contrary to what you said, as you can imagine. But look, I mean, like any group of people, there's obviously diverging opinions. I mean, I don't think we can hide that. But the idea of our Westminster system is a party gets together, especially if you're a part of the cabinet that is forming leading the government, to essentially agree in public and have those discussions behind the scenes. So it's not surprising to see it, and I think you'll see more of it. What will be more interesting over the coming days and weeks is to see how Prime Minister Carney and his team deal with it. Yeah. Is it something that they'll sort of allow? Is it something that they'll, behind closed doors, talk about and try to rein in a bit? Or is it something that they'll allow in certain files but not in others? So I think that's going to be really a bit of a test of the culture that Carney wants to create within his government. But that's not abnormal. And especially in the case of Robertson, somebody that's a new minister, that certainly doesn't surprise me at all. Guilbeault is not. Guilbeault obviously would have known exactly what he was doing. But I think we obviously know the dynamics of where he stands on some of these issues. So normal for the party and a government to have that happen, not as normal that it be this frequent. What will be interesting, will they rein it in? And if so, how and when?
Well, to Brian's point, Tony, what was interesting, I think, on the day of the cabinet swearing in was in the initial remarks from the Prime Minister, he made a point of saying, that cabinet ministers essentially wouldn't be constrained in the way that, I'm paraphrasing, but this is how I interpret it, in the ways that they had been, let's say, under the previous government, or maybe even the government before, as you would know better than I would. How hard is it for that to actually be the case in practice? Well,
I mean, here's a pro tip, though. You don't walk out of the swearing in or your very first cabinet meeting in a new ministry and start talking to the media. I'm sorry, with all respect to you.
Don't listen, anybody. Don't listen. Yeah.
It's just like there would be problems. And then PMO has to issue a clarification, or there's a tweet clarification initiated by PMO, I'm sure. Right. So why get into that early on? I don't think that's good practice, and I think that the Carney government will realize that in due course.
Do you think, though, it is inherently challenging to do what he says? He wants to be the case, which is for there essentially to be more autonomy for cabinet ministers, to it not be so controlled by the centre? Well,
I think it always starts off that way. Right. Typically, it doesn't end that way, and that's true of either party that's been in federal government. It tightens up over time because you want your cabinet ministers to stay in cabinet, and so therefore the frequency of mistakes in today's world, where social media, it used to be cable news was 24/7. Now it's social media is hypercharged 24/7. So there has to be a degree of discipline there, I would argue.
Nathan, what are your thoughts on that? You've also sat around the cabinet table in the province of BC. Is it possible to do what Carney says?
Well, I always agreed with the Premier in every single instance on every single matter, Vashi. So I never had that challenge that you folks are talking about. I think it's both of my friends here have articulated it well. There's a bit of a cost benefit, right? Having Gregor is a very experienced cabinet minister, mayor, and sat in legislature before, Minister Guilbeault as well. You want their intelligence, you want their rigor to issues. You don't want people necessarily freelancing. And I think you mentioned the two issues, housing and pipelines. Both of those are really important issues, right? There's going to be a few where, as Tony talked about, discipline is important. Mr. Carney is also different. He's not a seasoned politician. He's his first time role doing this. He's done other leadership. But just as Gregor found, a passing question in the hallway, asked a certain way, gives a certain response. And now, as Tony says, you're issuing clarifications and you're just distracting away from the other things you want to be doing. So good discipline. But I guess I'm one to champion for you, not just for you in the media, but for the public, that we have ministers coming to the mic that have not got the speaking points tattooed on their forearm that are issued by the PMO. I want folks that are bringing their experience and their intelligence and sometimes maybe a differentiated point of view, but got to be careful of those real big issues, pipelines, housing. There's probably a few others where you just got to know what you're saying and be very clear about it.
Got just under a minute, Brian, last word to you. And you know this too from listening to the cabinet swearing in. Do you think the Prime Minister will be able to execute on the kind of autonomy that he says he would like cabinet ministers to have?
It's tough. And I want to maybe share with viewers, I've been around politics for a while, and I certainly had the privilege of serving. And I can tell you that nobody really is afraid to have debates and internal to your team. People, in fact, do it all the time, and it's important. And it's a very pivotal part in the way that we develop policy and take positions. So that's not the issue. And I think somebody that maybe hasn't been at the heart of politics for too long might say to themselves, well, there's no problem. Well, they can say what they think, and we can have debate and discourse. No issue there. The problem is the media will take that and focus on it. So you have this big announcement that's life-altering for the country, you think, in a positive way, and it gets no play because they focus on a discrepancy between a minister and the Prime Minister, and that becomes discouraging.
I blame the media too, Vashi, just for the record.
Yeah, it's all my fault. I understand. Brian just likes to blame me for everything. I get it. Thanks, guys. Great discussion. I really appreciate it. Our front bench, Brian Gallant, Nathan Cullen, and Tony Clement. We're back in just a moment with more Power Play just ahead. The opposition continues to criticize the government over its decision not to release a spring budget. They will instead deliver what they're calling a substantive fall economic statement. Lots more reaction ahead to all of that. Tonight on News Channel, we'll have more coverage into the evening and into tomorrow. Lots more to come with the tax cut as well. I'm going to leave Power Play there. I'm Vashi Capellos. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful night.